Episode number 229 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. My guest today is Candice Rasa. Candice is the founder of Rasa Healing and has 15 years experience utilizing transpersonal, existential, and humanistic therapy to catapult soul-level transformation in her clients. She has served the community as a therapist since 2007 and started her career supporting the HIV community, interweaving spirituality and psychotherapy. Candice also has 7 years' experience as a clinical director of 3 addiction treatment centers in Florida, studying spirituality and developing programs to enhance connection. Candice utilizes holistic perspectives, including Buddhist psychology and mindfulness, to focus on mental, emotional, and spiritual healing, not just from an individualized framework, but with an awareness of ancestral karma. Her areas of expertise include supporting healing from shame, grief, anxiety, depression, relationship issues, self-worth challenges, and addictions. In addition to being a licensed clinical social worker and qualified supervisor in the state of Florida, Candice also completed Karma Yoga at Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health and is certified in integrated energy therapy, the Akashic Records, journey dance, channeling, mediumship, and mindfulness meditation techniques. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. So welcome back, Candice.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here to connect with you and your work and all the beautiful souls that listen to your podcast.
Well, Candice has been on my podcast before, so she is also my personal Akashic Records healer, I guess I'm going to say, because she heals me with her messages. And I have to say, you are so right on. It's insane. It is insane. I remember you even mentioning my daughter's names, but you were talking about something different. And I was like, and you just mentioned their names and you didn't even know their names, but you were saying it because, their names mean other things. So, I thought that was just crazy. It's insane. So Candice was with me on episode 12. If anybody wants to get more of her background, how she got into Akashic Records, she also has a background in psychotherapy. If you guys want to find out a little bit more about Candice, you can go to episode 12 as well. But in this time that I have you on, we're going to be talking about something a little more personal that Candice has experienced. And thank you so much for coming on and being vulnerable and open about your story. But I think it's going to help so many people listening.
Thank you. Yeah. I feel like it's challenging to do this dance in life, right? Like the human experience with the spiritual experience. And I know that others have been, have dealt with loss, have dealt with pregnancy loss, have dealt with unexpected, holes that you step into and that are not part of your plan. And I know that is something that it can be really challenging for people to make sense of. And as a person who follows so deeply spiritual practice, it was a real challenge for me to interweave my own human space and hold space for the pain that was, and still work on the spiritual practice around that. So I'm excited to talk more about that whole journey today and just really lean into the heart with greater vulnerability to people who are there and are asking the question that I asked myself, which is how do I move through this with grace? What medicine is here for me? How can I make the most of this experience to grow as a person? And so I hope to share those messages today with people.
Yes. I remember specifically having the conversation with you, and it was very raw. I mean, there's so many different aspects of it that were so painful that you had gone through. And again, I so appreciate you coming on and being vulnerable with your story. So yeah, I would love to have you share your story.
Sure. Yeah. So back in right before the pandemic, I got pregnant unexpectedly, and I am was close to 40. So I was kind of surprised by that. It wasn't something that my husband and I were necessarily planning. And it really sort of opened our eyes to this awareness of like, okay, so like the world works in mysterious ways, and there's magic everywhere, and let's be open to this, and so we were kind of like adjusting our energy and aligning with that. And then we went on this lovely trip to Europe, and we had a commitment ceremony there, and we involved the baby in the commitment ceremony. And then we get back and we find out that the pregnancy is not viable, that the baby had no heartbeat. And it was right at the beginning of the pandemic in February of 2020. And, that was the medical system, and the medical institution was really tough. They were kind of like, they didn't quite tell us everything directly, and we were kind of left in limbo. So my heart goes out to people who've struggled with like having allies in the medical community, because I
Yeah.
struggled with that. The way they relayed the information was really tough. But we ended up struggling with not being able to, like, we had to have to pass the baby on our own at home because of the pandemic. And there was really no support for that, really no guidance, or, you're just sort of like following a paper they print out and send you home with. And it was
Wow.
really traumatic. I feel like women don't talk enough about pregnancy loss and what you have to do. There's nothing, and I might get emotional talking about this, but like, I hope you're good with that.
Of
Everybody here is good with that.
course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. But no one really prepares you for what it's like to like pass a baby in your home by yourself, So that was like really tough for my husband and I. And it turned out that I was able to get in for follow-up appointments, and they were like, there's still more to be done medically, but we can't offer you surgery now because it's considered an elective procedure because of the pandemic. So I had to wait like additional 3 or 4 months to even have the surgery. And so I kind of walked around like in this weird state of like, do I still have baby energetic with me? Like, do I still have, the soul of this baby with me? Like, I was really like in this limbo state. It was really hard to kind of
Mhm.
exist that. And I imagine a lot of people can really relate to this place of like feeling like they're in limbo. So that was like really tough. And then, gratefully, we were finally able to have the D&C that it needed to happen.
Mhm.
And it felt for me like an opportunity to really start over again in my healing journey in my body. And it was actually a very like psychic experience I had. I don't know if I ever told you this, Michelle, but I had a dream um, right around the time of my D&C that this little girl came to me in my dream.
Mhm.
Um,
Oh, it's amazing.
yeah. And she said, I'm coming to, like, I'd like to come to be with him. And then she showed this, I saw this vision of my son who's all grown up,
I
and she was
got
like hugging
chills.
him.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
And she said, he needs me. And she was like hugging him from behind. And it was like at my husband and I's like funeral. That was the scene. And she was like hugging him from behind. And she's like,
Oh
he
my
needs
God.
me. Like,
No, I don't think you told me this. Wow.
yeah. And she's like, I'd love to come for him because he needs me. And then she turned to me in this dream, and she said, and I'm coming to extend your work in the world. And if you'll have me, that's what I want to do. And what struck me, and I say this to clients who struggle with like, bringing baby in through form, and whatever way they're taking that journey, is what struck me still to this day was when she said, I'm coming to extend your work. She said, but I came in to let you know that I'd like to come, but it really needs to be your choice if you want me here. And it really felt like she was saying, um, you know, this has to be an embodied choice by you and, my husband at the time. And she's like, and if it's something that in this life you aren't ready to do again, I love you, I support you, and I'll see you in the next life.
Wow.
And it was super casual. And that's the part that struck me. It was like no big deal, and I know you have children. You think about them not being in your lives. You can't imagine how your life was before them.
Yeah.
It's like you are just such a different person, and so much more expanded in love because of your children. I can never imagine like what my life would be like if she never came.
Hmm.
But it to them on the other side, and since my work in the Akasha, I've learned this, is like we have such saturation and such attachment in the present moment of our human physical lives that we forget the magic and the mystery of all the dimensions and times and spaces we've lived, and really the infinity of consciousness available to our souls. And it's really these moments on earth are blips, they're blips on a radar to our grand soul experience. And I think really I've seen this not just with my daughter, but I've seen it since then, how casual children that are coming in. They're like, I'd love to come, but if it doesn't work out, it's all good. Like, just very chill about it. Like, they recognize that there is no death, really.
Right.
And that was a powerful dream that shifted things for us, because we weren't really sure if we were going to try again, because it happened so spontaneously initially. And it just felt, for me, so purposeful. I don't know if you want me to pause here or if you have any thoughts about that, but it was a crazy moment in our journey. It was kind of like everything became spiritual, right? Because there's this moment of like real intense loss and loneliness and fear and, like questioning your body and things that women do when things, don't work out. And I put that in quotes because like we think that the way things are happening is wrong or bad or shouldn't be. And really, spiritually, there is no such thing. What is happening to me is for me.
Yeah. Human perspective versus universe perspective, spirit perspective. There is a difference. There's this ego perspective, not to say that that's bad, but it is a different perspective on right or wrong, or, how things should be, versus the perspective of this openness of just possibilities, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this situation sort of like brought it to like a deeper space for me. And, I'm somebody who's always looking for the spiritual connection and things. And I know that is something that has brought me a lot of comfort, is to be able to zoom in to my human experience and hold sacred space with pain, and then to zoom out, and it just gets some perspective on like life and, all the gratitude that I have. It does, in no way does it mean that the suffering I'm experiencing is not valid, but it gives me perspective to have and the access to understand, like, we live in this magical world and I don't really control anything. And I give this reference to people all the time. My favorite author around this topic is Pema Chodron.
I love her.
When Things Fall Apart, right? That book is so good. And I got through that.
The power
time
of stay, right? The power of stay, where you just kind of stay with your whatever comes up. Don't fight it. Just stay with it. It's so powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's not easy, and I practice this every day, and it was not easy, for me to do that. It was like, wow, like you're coming, you're on your knees. You're on your knees in this journey of awareness. So, I mean, from there, it was like the summer, it was the summer through the pandemic, and things were, I guess, in a lull of such. And I said to my husband, I turned 40 in December. Let's do a few months of healing our bodies, our hearts, our minds, and really like reflect on whether we want to open the door again intentionally. So we both had to do a lot of healing. And frankly, I think it doesn't get talked about enough either, is like sometimes partners and their trauma. Like, he had a ton of trauma watching me pass, the embryo at home. He had a lot of trauma and being helpless, not being able to be in the hospital for the surgeries. And so he had to do a lot of emotional healing as well. And so it took some time for us to get on the same page. And we said, you know what? I said this, like, if we make it to my 40th birthday and I'm not pregnant, the tribe has spoken. I trust God. All is well in the world. I'll see her in the next life.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know it was a girl, but we just sort of, I said that, and there was an ease in that, right? Like, so many of us, and I think I would have been sad, either way, but I knew that, if it didn't go my way, whatever that was, but I feel like I felt so much more at peace as a leaf floating down the river than by myself in a canoe trying to paddle upstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Like, let yourself float down the river in the way that life has meant for you. And I think a deepening of surrender has been a life lesson I've learned through all of my personal pain. That is such a powerful medicine. I think others can benefit from. So, like, A month later after that, I was pregnant again. Just the moment we opened the door, she like popped back in. And I never knew she was a she until they confirmed that. But like I knew that and spiritually, intuitively. And that wasn't an easy pregnancy, right? It was like every day you get up and you're afraid. I mean, I
Right.
know you work with women and I
Yes.
know that this is something they talk about. It's
Yeah.
really hard when you experience pregnancy loss to hold I have to refer to myself in my first pregnancy with my son as like a happy, ignorant pregnant woman, And now this time
Yeah.
I was much more aware of like all the things that can go wrong, and it was hard to hold space for that and hold space for hope in the same experience.
Yeah.
So that was hard. I mean, I have a memory in my head of sitting outside with my husband, and we're both barefoot, and I love to go sit outside in the sun just to like connect with nature and clear my energy. And we're both sitting out there, and I was super pregnant at the time, and I'm like, I'm really struggling with anxiety, and I'm like trying to be in the present moment, but I'm just like arm wrestling it. And he said, what would happen if you just used whatever facts you had in your environment as evidence of how you should be showing up?
Mhm.
And he's a therapist, so he knows how to work magic in this way. And I said, tell me more. What do you mean by that? And he's like, well, what we heard today from the doctors? How does your body feel today? Right? How did like how is like your emotional lens today? And it was this like real deep awareness of like the information we have in this very moment, in this very minute, is beautiful and healthful and hopeful. We don't know what's going to happen in the next minute, and we don't know
Right.
what's going to happen tomorrow. And we might have to face some really hard things, but in this moment, we have health,
Wow.
right? We have
Yeah. Yeah.
vitality. And it was such a powerful moment for me. And I think I lived minute to minute with that mindset
Hmm.
for much of that pregnancy.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. It's so powerful to just like you said, minute to minute.
Yeah. I mean, because I also, obviously I'm aware of the spiritual implications that like energetically baby's receiving all of my energy. And it
Mhm.
was just like really wanting to do my best. And I think this is a great, probably also side note for parents. Like you want to do your best for your children, but like the reality is you're not always at your best as a human soul.
It's totally true. And that's okay too. Like all of it's okay.
Exactly. Yes. So it was this like my daughter was an inspiration for me for that as well. Like I'm not just doing this to create a sense of groundedness in myself, but I want to continue to practice this for her. Right. So it was a rough go. And I had a lot of, again, sort of give and take tug of war with the doctors about my age as a 40-year-old pregnant person. There's like geriatric listed in my
Oh
chart
yeah.
and
Yeah. That term.
geriatric pregnancy or something like that. I, had a dozen more so tests that I probably wouldn't have agreed to with my first child, but did because of my history of loss, pregnancy loss, and my age. So it was a tough go. And I was like doing all the things and like took a holistic hospital birthing class, and I'm going to have a VBAC, and I had my laminated, birthing plan. And I had like a midwife that like was really supportive of the VBAC, which I had to like pull her out of a needle out of a haystack in the town I live in, because they don't do VBACs in my town. So I was like so proud of that connection. And then certainly, life has other plans, right? So like her birth, I could go into that story. Is really powerful. Does that feel
Yeah.
good? That,
Absolutely.
yeah, cool. So, I still remember it like it was yesterday. There was some like conversations with my doctor. Hey, we want to induce you. And I'm like, hey, I'm 39 weeks, baby's good. Day before we had an ultrasound, like it was perfect. I don't really want to be induced, you know. Well, come to the office and talk to us about that. I said, okay, I'll come down to the office, but I have this non-stress test that I had to go to once a week. Do you want me to skip the non-stress test? And they said, no, why don't you go to that and then come to us afterwards? And I said, okay. And I'm sure some of your listeners will know what an NST is, but they like strap you up to the baby monitor. They listen to the heart of the baby, right? Make sure baby's heart is good, and then they send you on your way. So I always go 30 minutes. We pass with flying colors, and I dance out of there, right? And they always have it at the hospital. So I was on my way to the NST appointment. I waved to my husband on the driveway, and he said, don't agree to anything. it doesn't feel good in your soul. That's what he said to
Mm-hmm.
me. He's like, I'll see you back in 30 minutes. I said, see you
Mm-hmm.
back in 30 minutes. And I get in my car and I drive to the hospital for the NST. And they said, ma'am, the heart rate's not good. And I was like,
Oh.
yesterday it was good at the ultrasound. Did my doctor call you to do an induction? Because I'm not doing that today. They said, no, it's just something's not good. Can you please go upstairs for further monitoring? So I go upstairs for further monitoring, and the nurses were really rude. They were
Mm-hmm.
really unkind. They said, can you take your clothes off, please, and be admitted? And I said, well, I'd like to know what I'm being admitted for, like just basic informed consent. And they
Mm-hmm.
said, oh, so you're one of those. You're
Oh,
one of those
really?
women.
What's
Um,
wrong with people?
and I'm like, I don't really know if I'm with those. I said, maybe I'm with those. I don't know, but like, I just want to have all the information. Can you explain that to me? And they said, well, we see people like you all the time. You think you know yourself better than doctor knows you. They were just really rude. And I was like, well, I'm not going to be admitted until I speak to a doctor, until I understand what's going on. I'm happy to submit to whatever tests you think are necessary, but I don't want to be admitted. So it was kind of this chitter chatter with them. And I was still kind of feeling uncomfortable and not safe, like in my body, as like an
Yeah.
advocate for my body in a hospital setting. And then doctor comes in and just says, like, I'm sorry, like we are in a situation where we think something's happening with your placenta and we probably need to do a C-section. And I text my husband, I'm like, can you come on down and help me advocate I'm just needing some support here. And the doctor is pretty casual, and he's like, we might have to set this up for today because we can tell. And he's like, he kind of gave me all the evidence, he's like, I know this is, and he was great. I have to say, he's like, ma'am, we know this is not what you want. We know your birth. We've seen it. We've called over your doctor, and I'm so
Mm-hmm.
sorry that it doesn't get to be. And I just felt like so much compassion
Yeah, and
coming from him. It
seen,
made a
seen.
huge difference. Yeah, I'm seen in my values. And I think, again, like I feel like this story that I'm telling is such an example of how, like, I definitely walk the line of holistic and Western healthcare, and they could do better working together. It was very clear to me that Western care, they didn't really love the fact that I had some holistic education, and it's vice versa. Like either side of that, they don't really support one another. And I found that experience at the hospital for the most part, except for this provider who was really good. So he kind of like casually walks out and says, like, we're going to like start prepping for this in the next 4 to 5 hours. We're going to probably do this surgery. And I'm like, okay. So I'm just sitting there, like, I'm crying and just getting myself emotionally ready. And then all of a sudden, all the machines go off in the room, crazy loud noises.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody comes rushing in dramatically. The doctor, like 5 nurses, and they're like, we have an emergency. The heart has stopped beating. We need
Oh
to
my
go
God.
right now. And I mean, like, they didn't even ask me if it was okay. They just ripped my clothes right off of me, and they handed me a paper and said, sign this so we can admit you. And as I was like nervously signing the paper, the same rude nurse said to me, she'll sign anything now, to the other
Oh
nurse.
no. God, how are they allowed to work?
I,
I
I
can't,
looked, I cut my eyes over to her. I still remember that. And I looked at her like, are you for real? Like, this is like a trauma. We're like, I think pretty sure this is a trauma situation.
wow.
This is like really inappropriate. Like obviously there's bigger fish to fry, like my
Yeah,
baby's health, my health, right? But it was just like those things, they jump out at you because you're already so scared in those
yeah.
moments. You don't have anyone there,
That's so
and this
crazy.
is the messaging they're giving me, right? Um, so they run me, and thankfully this was not a nurse that was part of the operating room. She was just like an admission person. So I didn't have any other experiences with her, thankfully. And I have to say, for the most part, the rest of the staff were amazing. And there's probably, right, there's a bad apple in every bunch. But it
Mm-hmm.
sucks because it really did, when someone pushes up against you, what do? Especially as a woman in a healthcare system, you push back, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bit more like, well, I want to know what my rights are, and I want to know, all of the pros and cons of this choice. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I don't want to be in a relationship with a provider in that way. I want to be like in a collaborative relationship
Of
where people
course.
listen to me and support me, but that's just not always the case,
Isn't this a
unfortunately.
part of like, I mean, I would consider this a basic need. It's not even,
Yeah,
it's basic.
you would
Yeah.
think that it is, but I felt like I had to push and pull the entire pregnancy. I never felt like it was really collaborative because I was doing holistic practices in my my pregnancy and also seeing a Western midwife. And they were always suspicious of the other hand, either both of
Mm-hmm.
those providers. So it's just was hard for me to make my own decisions and feel sovereign in my body. In that moment, you know, you're in this crisis situation and it's like, this is what you say to me in this moment. You know, so I mean, I can barely remember, but I just remember being just raced like literally naked down the hall. I didn't even like bother. It's just like going now. And my husband gets off the elevator thinking he's coming to advocate for me, with
Mm.
me. He doesn't even realize I'm heading into surgery. Like throw him the scrubs. They're like, let's
God.
go. And he's all, and I remember he like grabs my hand and he's running and he's like, how are you so calm? And I looked over at him and I said, I'm in shock. I think I'm in shock.
Wow.
And he's like, I'm here. Like, I'm here for you. And, you know, thankfully they got the baby out really within 10 minutes, but I had placental abruption, apparently,
Mhm.
no pain, no cramps, no bleeding. There was no symptoms that I would have noticed that would tip me off that something was different with my body. And she was covered in blood. She swallowed blood. She had a 2 APGAR score. She wasn't breathing. She had no heart rate. She was not pink. It was not good. And they worked on her for quite a few minutes. And I remember like after they got her out, I could hear this large gasp. And then I kept asking my husband, is she okay? Is she okay? Because I couldn't hear her crying. And
Mhm.
he's like, and I kept hearing him saying, they're working on her. They're working on her. And I'm just like, you're just laying there. And you know, for me, and I had another C-section and I described that as the most surrendered I've ever been. It's like, just when you say that to God, he's like, oh, you thought you'd been surrendered? Let's
Yeah.
give you this one.
Oh my
And it
God.
was an even deeper sense. It's like, you could be no more surrendered than that, right? Like all the things I tried to control, and really in my life, this moment was like a great reflection that I control nothing and that it's up to God, you know, and her soul. Gratefully, they had her out in such a time where she didn't have long-term damage, but she did have to have some respiration for a bit after she was born, but otherwise miraculously okay. And it was, you know, it was a miracle. And I can't keep, you know, I keep thinking about this reality, which is that was the one day a week for the past 6 weeks that I went to an NST on a Tuesday. Every other day for the previous 5 weeks, I went on a Monday. And the only reason why I went on a Tuesday was because on that Monday, I had an ultrasound that was
Hmm.
also perfect. So it
Wow. It's
was,
crazy.
yeah, because I had no symptoms and our plan was to birth at home as long as possible and go to the hospital for VBAC. She wouldn't have survived at home laboring because of the heart rate issue. Again, I wouldn't have known that. You know, every year on her birthday, like to tell this story. It's a good, and it's crazy that our podcast lined up almost around that time,
Hmm.
when
Right.
we're meeting here today, because it's fresh for me. It's every year I have like ritual and prayer. I sit with it and I really think about surrender in a deep way. And I have to say, like, I want to speak about grief here. I feel like grief in the loss of the pregnancy, grief and like not having the birth that I wanted, also in air quotes, right? Grief in like the experience that I had at the doctors or some of the nurses, and the grief of like, what if things would have gone a different way? You know, there's a deep
Yes.
and sadness that
Yeah.
I had to sit with for a couple of weeks after she was born. And I think that's when we're in the thick of the human experience. Like, you know,
Hmm.
spiritual Candice wasn't really there. It was like such a need to practice regulation and soothing of my emotional body and my physical body after a traumatic birth again,
Hmm.
that it really was just a time of being held. And I think that I want to speak to this for people who have been through pain, is that like one of my favorite things to say, and I'm breathing deeply here because I'm still remembering all of it, is that like we don't have to fix pain. We don't have to, you know, heal pain. We don't have to stop pain or avoid pain or push pain down. We just have to hold pain as sacred. We just have to be with it.
Oh my God. I love
Fully,
that.
yeah,
Yes.
just fully embodied. Like, can you sit like in the dark, like in the tough moments with yourself and find compassion there? It's like a miracle. So simple and so hard to do when you're in those tough moments. And I think Pema Chodron talks a lot about this like we just find things to escape or to numb or to distract. And then we coexist with pain, and then we develop all this pathology in our mental and physical bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And I say it and you say it, and we practice that in the world in our work. But when I was there, it was not easy to be with pain. It was not there,
Yeah.
that easy. It was tough.
Wow.
And I think there's a rawness to that. There's a phrase that the Akasha says to me, to clients, and I finally like felt the reality of it. And it's always, they say this phrase, it's symbolic, but it could also be a really cool literal exercise. But usually when someone is holding so much saturated emotion or trauma that there's like, they're going to pop, they need a release. And they say something like, tell the person to get naked at the full of moon and crawl to the river at midnight and cry to the water until there are no more tears.
Mm.
And it's like this image of like raw, like just cry to the river, be one with nature, be raw, be in your true, I think the Pluto work, the Kali work, the shadow work, like be with that. And it's, that's the phrase that I was like, wow, like that was a moment where I was really like crying to the river, naked in the full of moon. Like I could be seen in my true self. And I was really in that raw space. There's the magic that we make on this planet, the people we get to become, I think is forged in moments like that. I know for me, it was all about like, who am I becoming as a result of this experience? Like, what has this experience taught me? And I could certainly speak to more on like how I alchemized that situation. And I think that's a key with trauma, is that we, as a therapist, licensed therapist myself, I think there's this delicacy that we want to take around that, where we don't want the trauma to become ours, that we are this pain, but we don't want to ignore it, right? So there's this, how do we do that? How do we alchemize it? That I think might be helpful for people to hear who are struggling with where they are. And, for me, it was about first and foremost, like holding sacred pain, crying to the whatever that meant. And then I think like something that my human mind does, that I know of a lot of human minds do, is the resistance, right? The mental resistance. Like, this was not supposed to happen.
Yes.
This was not supposed to happen. This was for me.
Yes. Yeah. It is something that everybody has that. Like it's a very natural response. Yeah. I even saw this with my daughter. She went through some difficult things, just recently, and which is another hard thing that we go through as parents. And so it's that initial like shock. This is not supposed to happen. And it's something that I see a lot of people do, and I've done it myself. Like it's such a natural response. Yeah. It's such a natural human response. Yeah. The book, The Untethered Soul, has really changed my life, because it's all about leaning into it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I love like this point that we're talking about, because this was not supposed to happen, I think, is a way that we cut ourselves off from the divine.
Yes.
And we take back a sense of control. I know what's supposed to happen, and it wasn't this.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So we cut off, and I think it's a way we push off or push back from that spiritual alchemy piece. So for me, the slide, although bumpy and turning, that took me into spiritual alchemy, was the question, or the statement rather, this was for me.
Wow. Oh my
God. Right? This happened to me because it was for me.
Wow. That is so profound.
I mean, here's the human mind again. It's like, I'm just telling you what I did, because, right? I wish I could be an enlightened person, but I'm not. I'm just human and dense like the rest of us. But even when I got to this is for me, where my mind went next? Well, what was for me?
Right.
and emotionally, as you know, you're in this raw emotional space, like you can't think of that answer. You don't have insight enough to that answer. And so like I realized like, okay, so like I gotta hold up here with that because I'm so close to it. It's like when the fire's burning, you can't look away or do anything else. So you just hold sacred space with pain. And the way that we don't resist the divine is by just saying, I this was for me. And
Mm-hmm.
just sit in that.
Yeah.
So just sitting in that, this is for me. This is for me. I don't know why. It'll make sense someday. Maybe it'll never make sense. Maybe 20 years from now I'll have even deeper clarity, but I know that it was for me. And just that for me was the doorway, the winding road that took me into spiritual alchemizing because it allows the divine in. There's an awareness that we're connected and that our experiences have meaning, right? Like that statement means our experiences have meaning and we're not alone here. I think we have to really watch the barrier of the way the mind shows up in the process of pain and then the way
Mm-hmm.
the mind shows up not wanting to sit with the discomfort of not having the answers as to why it was for me. But so I think those are the areas we, for me, I teach a lot of now because I had so much personal experience with just want to figure it out and feel comfortable. Just want to know what it was about so that I can now I have something to hang my hat on. It's like, you know, it's forever unfolding. Every year, if it's her birthday, it's like, oh my gosh, there's a deeper level of insight and deeper grief, and there's more. It's a
Yeah.
box that gives you more wisdom if you stay present with it. So, yeah, really intense.
Oh my God. It's there's so much profoundness from your story. And you know how sometimes you listen to stories and then you get your own kind of downloads and insight on it. You're like,
Yeah.
aha, aha, like it just keeps going. And I'm like, it was like a burst celebration in my mind of like different ahas and just epiphanies. And I just love the word spiritual alchemy or the phrase. I mean, there's just so much depth to that description of what it
Yes.
was that you went through. And it really it's crazy. And I, as you're talking, I'm like, just of course we're friends on Facebook. I see your posts and I see your children together. And I remember seeing a very specific moment where they interacted with each other and he was pushing her down the road in a little wagon.
Yes. Yeah.
And her response and the way she looked at him, I thought was so special. There's just this sacredness in that moment. I was looking at that for a while. I'm sure
Wow.
you've seen it.
Oh, yes.
It was really special. And now that you're telling me the dream and the specifics, which I don't remember you mentioning before.
Oh, yeah. It's been very covert. I haven't shared that publicly until now. I
But
think a
you
lot of
could
people
see
would
it
thought I was
reflected. You could
crazy.
see it even in these tiny little bodies.
Yes, yes. And, I think, I know from opening his own record, he's got a lot of previous trauma. He's got like this Lyran DNA. There's a lot of warrior stuff. There's a lot of got to take care of my own self. And we describe it jokingly, but seriously, there's like a post-apocalyptic vibe to him. Like he's always collecting and preparing for something. And I've always said like he has these two therapist parents, right? Very emotionally accessible, and it's like his worst nightmare. Like it's very challenging for him. But I worry about him because he doesn't always share openly. And he has now this, I mean, he's such a strong, vibrant, powerful, creative, mechanic, artistic child. And I'm just so grateful he's chosen us to help him evolve emotionally in this life. But his sister, there's a sweet relationship there where they have this connection and they hug each other and say, I love
So
you. And I
beautiful.
just feel good that she's there for him and he's there for her. I'm sure you can relate to that as
Yeah,
well. It's the magic of things, right?
for sure. I'm actually
Yeah.
scheduled to speak to this woman, to actually have her on my podcast. Her name is Lisa Miller, Dr. Lisa Miller. Have you heard of her before?
Okay. I'm not sure. Her name is really familiar.
Yeah, she actually had a TEDx talk and she
Oh
went through a
yeah. Yeah, that's where I
whole,
heard of her then.
yes, she went through a whole journey of trying to get pregnant and then adopting, really being called to adopt. And she just knew at that point. And then right after the adoption or the decision of the adoption, conceived. And it was like they were meant to be together, the children. I can't
Mhm.
wait to have her on. It's such an amazing story. But
Yeah.
what's interesting is that she also wrote a book called The Awakened Brain.
Hmm.
And it was all about looking at the brain, and they studied how depression impacts people in general. And then also with the questionnaire found that people who were more spiritual were more protected from depression. And how spirituality, your story is so significant in the sense that you went through such a human experience, which can take you really to the depths of your soul and emotion and really trauma. You went through all of those things, those things that you see in life, and you hear those stories and you're like, how in the world can I possibly conjure up the strength to get through this? And
Right.
so to do that, but yet your path has always been very spiritual, and also has also been very intentional. You
Hmm.
put intention, and the fact that every single year you create a ceremony around your daughter's birthday just shows your intentionality and how you infuse presence and intentionality into your life. And you do this as a practice, and
Yes.
how by doing so you are able to create this sacredness around something that has otherwise could be seen as the most traumatic. And it's kind of like those type of things are what causes some people to say, why would God do this? If there is a God, why would this happen?
Yes. Yes. And I think you bring a good point because I just want to say also honestly that I need that sacred spiritual ritual because there's still trauma memory in my body physically that shows up, surprisingly so, every year. I thought it was
Mm-hmm.
only the first time, because she's 1 year old, now she's two, maybe only it was then. But I start to notice there's tightness, there's panic, like I
Mm-hmm.
have all these feelings emotionally and physically. And so having ritual, prayer, doing some oracle, spending some time alone, and it's so important. It's like a way that I can continue to do the weaving of the human experience and the spiritual experience. And I love to just say a little bit more about spiritual alchemy. I think about alchemy as like we often think about it like it means we're like change, and I think it is obviously change, but nothing is lost in alchemy, right? We take something and we melt it
Yes.
down,
Oh, I love that.
build something new. Like nothing is lost, and you can't build without all of the pieces, right? Like you can't take out the metals and prefer only the gold and not the silver. When they show up and they melt together, like you're faced with this. Now here we are. Like, what do we build? What do we reform with what we've got? And it's there's a curiosity there and a presence there as well. I think spiritual alchemy is always about like not leaving anything behind and being really curious about the medicine that is for you, the medicine that is for you from what you experience, from what is, not resisting any part of it, especially the human experience.
Nothing is for nothing. Sometimes I think that it comes in my mind, like nothing is for nothing.
Good one.
Like nothing gets
Yes.
lost. Nothing's lost. And I can I just tell you, I love speaking to you because when I have podcast guests, at the end of the podcast, I do some editing. I look through, I listen through, and there are certain quotes that I'll take from the person. I'll post it on social media before it's just
Yeah.
kind of like my technical stuff. Like this is the behind the scenes. With you,
Sure.
I could literally just pick any point in time in the conversation and it's a quote, and it's a freaking fabulous quote that I'm like, every single
Oh
thing that
my
you're
goodness.
saying is just so good, and it's infused with wisdom, and I feel like you're just so connected to that wisdom. And I just think that you're really gifted at what you do. I mean, for real, like I'm also very picky because I've been doing this kind of stuff for a while. I've been interested and I've been speaking to lots of different people. I happened to meet Candice not as a client. Actually, it was just at a retreat that we had, and immediately connected with her. Like it was like a recognition. I'll put it that
Yes,
way.
like our souls know each other. Yes.
It was a recognition. I'm like, oh, hi. Nice to see you again. It was kind of like that. It was like, so and we don't live close to each other. And I had a reading with her after, but I already knew that she was so connected to wisdom because she just talked it. And so I'm just telling the listeners, you guys check her out. Like whether it's just her wisdom or blogs, because she has a very long list and you might have to wait, but it's worth the wait. It's worth the wait. There is truth. You are connected to truth. You're connected to that wisdom. And I know that you being connected to that wisdom, which is why I love this whole discussion that we're talking about, is that is what gives you strength. And it's a reminder for anybody listening how important it is to make that space, to connect to spirit, to connect to that wisdom, to connect to that spirituality. It's really so vital. It's fuel for the journey.
Yes, yes. I mean, I feel like everything you just said, I'm like just deeply connected to and aware of. And I think that, we all just we have our own experiences. And this doesn't mean that life is going to be amazing in the way that we design or control. And it also doesn't mean that life's going to be terrible and that we should be afraid around every corner we turn.
Mm-hmm.
It just means that we're here to experience all of that, right? And the magic and the wholeness is found in the medicine of those experiences. And I always, as a Buddhist, I'm always sort of attached to this like notion that the only thing constant is change. And it's, you have to be practicing that, right? Like the world is here to give me what is for me. And some days it will be amazing. And initially that's really scary because you're like, oh my gosh, the next moment it could all be gone. Yes, it can. But this moment, so delicious.
Yes.
And I would have never thought that before, right? Before it would have been like, oh, I'm worried about this or I have to take care of that. And we think we're living in the present moment, but we're actually like trying to get away from the past to create something in the future and avoiding fear, avoiding pain, avoiding when life shows you its underbelly. But I find like when you accept the underbelly of life, the present moment is so much more delicious and impactful. And I think we could all, I know I can continue, and I do this often, especially when I look in the eyes of my children, like for this I came, right?
Wow.
Like,
yeah. Oh my God, I love it. Candice, I can talk to you for hours and hours and hours. And of course, we really do need to get together, So
I know.
yeah.
I say that every time. Well, thank you so much for having me on our, again, to talk about my story. I felt like I was ready to alchemize it more and share the experience. So thanks for giving me a space for that. And I wish lots of love to you and all your listeners, holding you deeply.
Well, if anybody wants to reach out to Candice, you can find her information in the episode notes. Do you want to mention your website just so people can hear?
Sure. Yeah, it's rasahealingservices.com. And I do a free monthly Akashic predictions and take questions. And it's just a way to help community come together once a month and be intentional about the month ahead. So you can always find a link for that on my website too.
So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.